So, put yourself in this scenario for a moment. You're sitting in the passenger seat,
Okay.
and you're teaching a teenager how to parallel park for the very first time.
Oh, boy.
Right. They've got their permit, their hands are sweating at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, and they are just looking to you for guidance.
Terrifying.
It really is. So you pull up next to this tight space on a busy street, and you just point vaguely at the gap between the two cars, and you say, "Park here."
Just that.
Just that. And so the teenager obviously panics. They crank the wheel entirely too hard. They slam on the gas instead of the brake, and they just completely jump the curb.
Oh, no.
Yeah, you hear that sickening crunch of metal on concrete. The hubcap goes flying off into the gutter.
RAP the hubcap.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. What if your reaction to that total disaster was to simply sigh, wave your hand, say next car, and then force them to drive down the block to do the exact same thing again?
Without saying anything.
Without saying anything. Zero explanation of what just went wrong.
Well, they're going to obliterate the next curb, too.
Right.
And probably the one after that. And, I mean, eventually, they might even internalize the idea that mounting the sidewalk and destroying a hubcap is just like a mandatory step in the parking process.
Right, like that's just how you do it.
Yeah. Or more likely, they're going to develop such a severe aversion to parallel parking that they just refuse to ever try it again.
Which is a complete failure of teaching, Like if you let someone crash, brush past it, and demand they try again without breaking down the mechanics of the failure, you aren't an instructor. You are just a spectator to their struggle.
Absolutely. And in behavior analysis, we refuse to be spectators.
Yeah.
We don't just throw learners into chaotic environments and cross our fingers that learning will organically manifest.
Right, hoping for the best.
Hoping doesn't work. We build a highly structured, meticulously precise environment to guarantee that learning happens.
Yeah.
We engineer the environment to remove the guesswork.
Because relying on hope or pure trial and error is not a valid clinical strategy.
No, especially not for learners who might already have a history of frustration or delayed skill acquisition. We have to systematically arrange the interactions to create these undeniable, crystal clear opportunities for success.
And that philosophy right there brings us to the core of today's deep dive into the behavioral intelligence con Mara Sánchez curriculum.
Powered by Amethyst Therapy Services.
You know it. This deep dive is a fundamental pillar of our complete RBT task list series. Today, we are stripping away the clinical jargon to look at the actual mechanics of item C.3.
Implement discrete trial teaching procedures.
Yes, implement discrete trial teaching procedures. And I'm telling you, this is a big one.
It's massive.
Yeah.
This specific skill is the engine of behavioral acquisition. It really sets the baseline for nearly everything a registered behavior technician executes during a structured clinical session.
Everything.
Yeah, whenever we face the challenge of teaching a target skill that a learner has zero baseline proficiency in.
Like brand new skills.
Brand new. Whether we're teaching a toddler to identify the color blue or helping a nonverbal child pronounce their first vocal approximation of a word, or even teaching an adult to match corresponding safety signs.
Right.
Discrete trial teaching is the architectural framework we use to build that skill from the ground up.
I really want to highlight the sheer magnitude of this topic for anyone who's currently studying for their board certification, because Domain C, which covers behavior acquisition, constitutes 25% of the entire RBT exam.
A quarter of the exam.
A quarter of your entire professional assessment hinges on understanding how to build new behavior.
And that exam weighting directly reflects the clinical reality. The practical stakes out there on the floor are enormous.
How so? Like for the client specifically?
Well, from the perspective of the client, this methodology is frequently the most direct, most efficient route to building discrimination skills.
Okay.
Because when a learner isn't absorbing information from their natural environment,
Like just through play.
right, when the ambient learning most kids do just by playing isn't sinking in, we have to isolate the variables.
Mm-hmm.
And then from the perspective of the supervising board-certified behavior analyst, there's an absolute expectation of flawless execution.
Not flawless.
Yes. Supervisors refer to this as procedural integrity.
Procedural integrity. So if an RBT is out there running these trials loosely, treating it more like, I don't know, casual playtime rather than a clinical procedure, the whole foundation just crumbles.
It degrades so rapidly because sloppy execution of discrete trial teaching generates compromised data.
And bad data is dangerous.
It is. When a supervisor looks at a graph built on compromised data, They make incorrect clinical decisions. They might abandon a teaching program that was actually working perfectly fine,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
or they push forward with one that is actively frustrating the client. And beyond the data, poor execution often leads directly to prompt dependency.
I've seen that so many times.
The client learns that if they just sit passively, the therapist will eventually do the heavy lifting for them. So the efficacy of the entire intervention rests entirely on the precision of the technician.
Okay, so let's define our terms before we get into the weeds here. If we look at the foundational texts, how do they formally define discrete trial teaching, or DTT?
So the standard literature defines DTT as a teaching format utilizing structured, masked, distinct trials. Each trial consists of a defined antecedent response consequence unit, separated by a brief intertrial interval.
See, when I read that, it sounds like an instruction manual for programming a machine on a factory floor.
It's very dry.
Yeah. Defined antecedent response consequence units. Let's translate that into plain English, into human interaction. What does it actually look like when two people are sitting across from each other?
The simplest way to conceptualize it is that the therapist dictates the rhythm.
The therapist dictates the rhythm.
Right. It is a highly controlled, therapist-initiated interaction. You, as the instructor, present one solitary, clear instruction. You provide a specific window of time for the learner to process and respond. The moment they respond, you deliver an immediate, unambiguous result based entirely on what they just did.
Okay.
Then, you pause to clear the slate, and you initiate the sequence again.
The distinction there seems to be the control of the rhythm, because if a kid is playing in a sandbox, they are learning, but they are setting the pace. Like, they dump the sand, they build the castle, they wander off.
Exactly. What you're describing in the sandbox is a free operant arrangement. In free operant scenarios, the learner responds continuously.
Right.
There's no discrete beginning or end to their behavior. It flows at their discretion.
They're in charge.
Right. But DTT is the structural opposite of that. A discrete trial has a definitive start, a measurable middle, and a definitive end.
Okay, let's dissect that definitive start, middle, and end. If we break this down to its absolute molecular level, what are the actual steps an RBT is executing?
The framework relies on the three-term contingency.
The ABCs.
The ABCs, the bedrock of operant conditioning. It involves the antecedent, the behavior, and the consequence. And within the context of DTT, we assign very specific clinical roles to those three terms.
Okay, lay them out for me.
So the first step, the antecedent, is deployed as an SD, or a discriminative stimulus.
Now, I want to pause on the term SD because I think people often conflate it with just a simple command. Is an SD just me telling a kid to do something?
It goes much deeper than a command. A true discriminative stimulus is a signal alerting the learner that reinforcement is currently available, contingent upon a specific behavior.
Okay, wait, give me an example of that.
So if you place a red card and a blue card on a table and you say, touch red, that verbal instruction is the SD. It changes the environment. It tells the learner, in this exact moment, touching the red card will result in something highly preferred.
And touching the blue card will not.
Exactly. Touching the blue card gets you nothing. It sets the condition for success.
So the SD has been delivered, the environment is primed, we move to the second term.
The second term is the response. This is the observable behavior the learner emits after hearing the SD. But there's a crucial caveat here.
What's that?
The response must occur within a designated window.
Oh, right.
You don't present the SD and then allow the learner 3 minutes to just stare at the wall before answering.
Right, you're not just hanging out.
No, generally, you're looking for a response within a few seconds. The learner will either omit the correct response, an incorrect response, or they will offer no response at all.
And their specific response dictates the third term, the consequence. But let's clarify that word real quick. In everyday language, consequence sounds punitive. It sounds like you're sending them to the principal's office.
Right, it has a bad rap. But in behavioral science, a consequence is simply the stimulus that immediately follows a behavior. It carries no inherent moral weight.
It's just what happens next.
Exactly. If the learner emits the correct response, the consequence is the immediate delivery of reinforcement. So praise, a token, access to a toy.
Love it.
But if the learner emits an incorrect response or fails to respond entirely, the consequence is the immediate implementation of an error correction procedure.
Okay, is that the end of the sequence then? Antecedent, response, consequence, and we're done.
There is a hidden fourth component that technicians frequently overlook.
The secret ingredient.
It is the intertrial interval.
Intertrial interval, a pause between the rounds.
A very deliberate, structured pause. It typically lasts only a few seconds, but its function is monumental. It establishes a boundary.
What does that boundary do?
It communicates to the learner without words that the previous trial is officially concluded, the consequence has been delivered, and a new opportunity is about to begin.
Okay.
If a therapist skips that interval, the instructions bleed together into this overwhelming continuous stream of demands.
Oh, it sounds awful.
The learner loses the ability to discriminate where one task ends and the next begins.
That constant stream of demands sounds exhausting. So let me pitch a visual analogy to see if it maps onto this structure. When I picture DTT, it feels remarkably similar to a professional baseball player taking batting practice.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of that comparison.
Well, when a player is in the batting cage, every single element is isolated and controlled. The pitching machine firing the baseball is the SD.
Right.
It is the undeniable cue that the opportunity to act has arrived.
Yes.
The batter swinging the bat is the response. The consequence is immediate and tangible. They either feel the satisfying crack of the bat hitting the ball perfectly, or they feel the rush of air from a swing and a miss.
Perfect so far.
But they don't just wildly swing again while they're off balance.
Right.
They step out of the box, they adjust their batting gloves, they tap their cleats, and they reset their stance.
The intertrial interval.
Exactly. That reset is the interval. It is massed, structured practice designed to build muscle memory. Pitch, swing, result, reset.
That analogy holds up perfectly under clinical scrutiny. It really does. Because what makes the batting practice metaphor so illustrative is how sharply it contrasts with an actual live baseball game.
Right, a live game is messy. You have runners stealing bases, the crowd is screaming, the pitcher is throwing curveballs.
The live game is chaotic. It's unpredictable and highly dependent on environmental variables. In our clinical framework, that live game represents natural environment teaching, or NET.
Net.
NET. It's dynamic. It follows the child's motivation in the moment and incorporates multiple shifting stimuli. But batting practice, that is pure DTT. You intentionally eliminate the chaotic variables of the live game.
You isolate the swing.
You isolate the swing. You provide the learner with the sheer volume of controlled repetition necessary to acquire a fundamental skill. I mean, you would never throw a novice into a major league game if they had never successfully swung a bat.
Of course not. You put them in the cage first.
You put in the cage first.
Okay, so let's take the batting cage out of the sports world and put it into a clinical setting. Walk me through a classic ABA scenario. What does this look like when an RBT sits down at a table with a learner?
Consider a foundational matching to sample program. The objective is to teach the learner to receptively identify the word car.
Okay, car.
The technician and the learner are seated across from each other. First, the technician clears the table of all extraneous materials.
Yeah.
No stray toys, no wrappers.
Getting rid of the chaos of the live game.
Eliminating the chaos. The technician places a picture of a car flat on the table, alongside two distractor images, perhaps a bicycle and an airplane.
They're setting up the pitching machine.
Precisely. The technician secures the learner's attention and clearly states, car. That single spoken word is the SD.
The ball is in the air.
The learner scans the visual array, reaches their hand forward, and touches the picture of the car. That constitutes the response. The moment their finger makes contact, within a maximum window of 3 seconds, the technician delivers the consequence. They provide enthusiastic, behavior-specific praise like, that is the car, incredible matching.
Yeah.
And they simultaneously deliver a preferred item, perhaps a quick turn with a light-up spinner or a small edible reinforcer.
And then they reset.
The technician smoothly clears the visual array from the table, pauses for about 2 to 3 seconds for the intertrial interval, shuffles the placement of the pictures so the car isn't in the exact same physical spot.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, and then initiates the next trial.
While all this rapid-fire interaction is happening, how is the technician maintaining accurate data? Because this is a scientific field, right? Not just a tutoring session. We need quantifiable proof of learning.
Data collection in DTT is elegantly simple by design. We utilize event recording for discrete behaviors. The technician is typically recording trial-by-trial data, which functions as a binary system.
Binary, like ones and zeros.
Exactly. Each opportunity is scored as either a 1 or 0, an occurrence of the correct, independent response or a non-occurrence. The behavior either met the criteria or it didn't.
Wow, it sounds incredibly straightforward when we talk about it in a vacuum. Pitch, swing, result, log the data. But humans are running these programs, which means there is massive room for error.
Always.
When supervisors are observing sessions, what are the fundamental breakdowns they see? Where do technicians deviate from the science?
The literature outlines several critical pitfalls, but let's weave them into a scenario of a well-meaning but ultimately ineffective session.
Okay, let's hear it.
Imagine an RBT who is trying to build rapport and be engaging. They have a target instruction, which is supposed to be touch red. On the very first trial, they say touch red. The learner gets it right.
Great.
On the second trial, the RBT wants to sound natural, so they say, can you find the red one for me?
Yeah,
On trial 3, they say, where is the red? On trial 4, show me red.
I see the issue right away. To the RBT, they think they're just being conversational. They are avoiding sounding like a robot. But to a learner who is struggling with language acquisition, those are 4 completely alien sentences.
You hit the nail on the head. The RBT thinks they're maintaining a fun, casual tone, but clinically, they are shattering stimulus control.
Shattering it.
The learner doesn't possess the receptive language skills to understand that find, where is, and show me are synonyms. They are attempting to isolate the specific auditory cue that signals reinforcement, but the technician keeps changing the lock on the door.
That is such a good way to put it. Changing the lock on the door.
The SD must remain identical across trials during the initial acquisition phase. Once the skill is mastered under strict conditions, then the BCBA will systematically program for generalization by introducing varied phrasing.
But if the RBT does it prematurely...
They are actively sabotaging the learner's comprehension.
That makes perfect sense. It was like changing the rules of a game while the person is still reading the instructions. What happens if the RBT gets the SD right, but struggles with the timing of the consequence? I know the literature stresses immediate reinforcement, but does a slight delay really matter that much? Say a 5-second delay.
Oh, in the realm of operant conditioning, a 5-second delay is an eternity.
An eternity.
Immediate reinforcement, specifically within a 3-second window, is an absolute requirement to strengthen a newly acquired response.
Why 3 seconds?
Imagine our RBT presents the SD, the learner touches the correct picture, and the RBT turns around to write down their data on a clipboard. During those 4 or 5 seconds of silence, the learner scratches their face, kicks the leg of the table, and looks at the ceiling. Finally, the RBT turns back and hands them a piece of candy, saying, good job matching.
Oh, I see the danger there. The last behavior the learner engaged in before receiving the candy wasn't matching the picture, it was kicking the table.
Exactly. You reinforce whatever behavior occurs immediately prior to the delivery of the reinforcer. If you delay, you run the massive risk of accidentally reinforcing superstitious behaviors or entirely unrelated, potentially disruptive actions. The reinforcement must be delivered the millisecond. The correct response occurs to forge the neurological connection between the SD and the target behavior.
That is fascinating. Okay, let's talk about the physical interaction. If a learner is consistently getting it wrong, an RBT might logically think, well, I just need to show them how to do it. They might grab the learner's hand and physically guide it to the correct picture every single time. What is the psychological fallout of overprompting?
Prompts are essential antecedent stimuli. They are scaffolds we use to guarantee success. But scaffolding is meant to be dismantled.
Right.
If an RBT utilizes a full physical hand-over-hand prompt for every trial and fails to systematically fade that support, perhaps by fading to a gentle tap on the elbow and eventually just a subtle gesture, they create a devastating phenomenon known as prompt dependency.
The learner essentially turns into a puppet.
Precisely. The learner figures out the actual contingency very quickly. They realize, I do not need to exert any cognitive effort. If I simply sit here with my hands in my lap, the adult will eventually move my arm and ensure I get the reward.
So they aren't learning the skill at all.
They haven't acquired the target skill. They have acquired the skill of waiting for physical manipulation. They become completely reliant on the therapist to initiate their movement.
That ties directly into the economics of the session, which brings us to the nuance of how we deliver rewards. Say the RBT does use error correction and guides the learner to the right answer. Do they still give them the same reward they would get if they did it perfectly on their own?
Oh, this is a highly nuanced error that plagues many sessions.
Yeah.
Imagine an RBT who's utilizing a highly preferred video clip on an iPad as a reinforcer. If the learner independently identifies the correct picture, they get 30 seconds of the video. Now, on the next trial, the learner makes an error. The RBT implements the correction procedure, uses a prompt to help them find the right picture, and then hands them the iPad for 30 seconds of the video.
Wait, if the payout is identical whether I do the grueling cognitive work myself or whether I just intentionally fail and let you give me a massive hint, why would I ever put in the effort to be independent?
You wouldn't. The behavioral economics simply don't support independence. We must utilize differential reinforcement.
Differential
The
reinforcement.
highest magnitude, most enthusiastic, most premium reinforcement is exclusively reserved for independent, unprompted, correct responses.
So the good stuff is for doing it on your own.
Yes. When a learner requires a prompt or an error correction, the consequence is severely downgraded, perhaps just mild verbal praise or a drastically smaller reinforcer. The environment must be engineered so that the learner contacts the richest reinforcement only when they exhibit independence.
It is a fragile ecosystem. One misstep with your timing, your phrasing, or your reward hierarchy, and you are teaching a completely unintended lesson. Let's pivot and put these concepts through a stress test. Okay. For everyone using this deep dive to prepare for their exams, we are going to build a complex, multi-layered scenario. Let's see if we can identify the breakdowns based on everything we've just discussed.
I am ready. Let's analyze a mock session.
Okay, visualize this.
Mhm.
An RBT is working in a clinic with a learner on identifying community helpers. The RBT says, "Show me the firefighter." The learner hesitates, looks away, and then reaches for the picture of the police officer.
Okay.
The RBT immediately pulls the pictures away, says nothing, waits 5 seconds, puts the pictures back down, and says, "Where is the fire guy?"
Oh my good.
The learner just sits there, so the RBT grabs their wrist, forces their finger onto the firefighter picture, and then gives them a massive high five and a whole handful of Skittles.
That is a masterclass in how to dismantle a teaching program. There are at least 5 catastrophic clinical failures in that single sequence. Let's untangle them, because analyzing a dense paragraph like this is exactly what candidates face on the exam.
Let's start with the error. The learner reached for the police officer instead of the firefighter. The RBT pulled the materials, stayed silent, and just tried again. Some might argue that pulling the materials is a form of consequence. Why is that incorrect?
Because it violates standard error correction procedures. Errors left uncorrected tend to replicate. By simply removing the materials and trying again, the RBT allowed the learner to practice failing without demonstrating the path to success.
So what's the mandatory protocol?
The mandatory protocol when an error occurs is to systematically represent the original SD and immediately provide a prompt, such as a gesture or a physical guide, to guarantee the learner contacts the correct response before moving forward.
But the RBT didn't represent the original SD. They initially said, "Show me the firefighter," and then on the second attempt they said, "Where's the fire guy?"
Which is our second catastrophic failure. They broke stimulus control. The learner is already struggling to discriminate the visual images. Now the RBT has radically altered the auditory instruction.
Right.
The learner is processing completely new vocabulary, where instead of "show me" and "fire guy" instead of "firefighter," the SD must remain rigid and uniform until mastery is achieved.
And when the learner froze up entirely on the second attempt, the RBT went straight to grabbing their wrist and forcing the action. If this is a pattern for this RBT, what is the long-term prognosis for this learner?
The prognosis is severe prompt dependency. By defaulting to a full physical prompt, without attempting a lesser intrusive prompt first, and by failing to systematically fade that physical guidance over time, the RBT is teaching the learner that physical corrosion is a mandatory component of the SD.
So they just wait for the grab.
The learner will eventually extinguish all independent responding.
Let's look at the grand finale of this terrible session. The RBT forces the learner's hand to the right answer and then rewards them with a massive high five and a handful of candy.
Which completely ignores the principles of differential reinforcement. They delivered a high-magnitude reinforcer for a heavily prompted, error-corrected trial. The learner just received the jackpot for doing absolutely nothing independent. Furthermore, the narrative implies the delivery of that handful of Skittles was clunky and delayed, likely violating the 3-second rule.
And stepping back to look at the whole picture, the RBT is dictating the entire pace, pushing through this rigid sequence of minutes. If a multiple-choice question asked what type of environment this was and offered free operant as a distractor, we'd know immediately to reject it.
Right. Wait, let me rephrase that without assuming. Why is this definitively not a free operant setup, even though it's chaotic?
Because despite the RBT's terrible execution, the fundamental structure remains therapist-initiated.
The RBT is presenting a demand, demanding a response, and controlling the consequence. In a free operant environment, the learner would be wandering around the clinic, perhaps picking up a toy fire truck, playing with it, and dropping it to go look at a book, with a therapist following their lead. DTT is about masked, structured trials.
Untangling a scenario like that really highlights how easily these procedures can slide into unethical territory if an RBT isn't careful, which makes this the perfect transition into our ethics minute. We have to examine the professional boundaries surrounding implementation.
The ethical guardrails are just as critical as the scientific principles. When discussing discrete-trial teaching, the two most prominent ethical vulnerabilities involve scope of practice and data integrity.
Okay, let's tackle scope of practice. An RBT is on the front lines. They spend exponentially more hours with the client than the BCBA does.
Definitely.
So imagine a scenario where an RBT is running an in-home session. They are running DT trials at the kitchen table, teaching a teenager how to identify severe weather warning signs.
Very important skill.
Very, but the teenager's mother is watching. And she says, he gets incredibly agitated sitting at this table doing drills. Can you just stop with the flashcards and teach him the signs naturally when you guys go for your walk later?
That puts the RBT in a tremendously difficult position.
Right, because you want to listen to the parent.
Human nature dictates that we want to be agreeable, we want to build rapport with the family, and frankly, the mother's request might even sound logical. But ethically, an RBT must recognize the hard boundary of their role.
Which is?
An RBT's scope of practice is explicitly limited to the implementation of behavior plans designed by the BCBA. Modifying the delivery format, deciding on your own to abandon structured DTT in favor of natural environment teaching is a clinical programming decision. It is the unilateral modification of a medical treatment plan.
So how does the RBT handle that without sounding like a rigid bureaucrat?
You handle it with professional grace. You validate the parent's concern, but you hold the ethical line.
Like, what would you say?
You might say, I completely understand why sitting at the table seems frustrating right now. However, my supervising BCBA designed this specific structured program to ensure he learns these safety signs as quickly and clearly as possible. I am not authorized to change the teaching format, but I will document your request immediately and have the BCBA contact you to discuss adjusting the programming.
That's a great script.
You protect the client, you respect the supervisor's design, and you stay within your clinical lane.
That distinction between implementation and design is crucial. Now, let's look at the second vulnerability, data integrity. We established earlier that DTT relies on binary data. Did the behavior occur or not? Ones and zeros.
And that data must be recorded contemporaneously. It must be logged in the moment as the trials are occurring.
But let's be realistic about the floor. An RBT might be running a fast-paced sequence, knocking out 20 trials back-to-back. The learner is engaged, the momentum is great, and the RBT doesn't want to break the flow by staring at a tablet to click a button.
I've been there.
Right. So the session ends, the RBT goes to their car, opens their tablet, and thinks, I remember how that went. He got about 80% of them right. And they just backfill the data from memory.
That is not just a minor procedural error. That is data fraud.
Fraud.
Altering, omitting, or backfilling data from memory is a severe violation of the Professional Ethics Code, regardless of how innocent the technician's intent might be.
Even if they possess a photographic memory, like they swear they know exactly what happened.
It doesn't matter. Human memory is notoriously fallible, especially after an exhausting clinical session. When you input data that you did not document at the time of the occurrence, you are falsifying a clinical record.
The stakes are that high.
It creates a cascading effect of harm. The BCBA looks at that fabricated graph and assumes the client has reached mastery, so they introduce a more difficult skill that the client isn't actually prepared for.
Or they think they're failing.
Or, conversely, the BCBA thinks the client is failing and they scrap a program that was silently succeeding.
The rule is absolute. Document it as it happens, or it essentially did not happen. Which brings us to the ultimate accountability check. When a BCBA is standing in the room, clipboard in hand, silently observing an RBT run a DTT program, what is going through their mind? What separates a mediocre technician from an exceptional one?
The BCBA is evaluating procedural integrity. They are essentially running a diagnostic on the technician's behavior. They are watching for the exact variables we've dissected today.
Like what specifically?
Is the SD uniforming clear? Or is it conversational and messy? Is the reinforcement delivered within that microscopic 3-second window, or is the RBT lagging? Are they fading their prompts, or are they inadvertently breeding prompt dependency? Are they respecting the inter-trial interval, or are they rushing the trials into a chaotic blur?
And if the BCBA sees a breakdown, say the RBT is constantly changing the SD, a competent supervisor doesn't just reprimand them and walk away.
Never. Punitive feedback rarely changes complex clinical behavior. A competent supervisor utilizes an evidence-based framework called behavioral skills training, or BST.
Let's define the architecture of BST. How does a supervisor actually teach an RBT to improve?
BST is a structured four-step training package. Step 1 is instruction. The BCBA verbally explains the precise DTT procedure, detailing exactly how the SD should sound and what the reinforcement schedule is.
Okay, so just telling them.
Telling them. Step 2 is modeling. The BCBA takes the RBT seat and physically demonstrates running the trials with the learner, showing what correct pacing and timing look like.
So they don't just talk about it, they prove that it works.
Exactly. Step 3 is rehearsal. The RBT sits back down and runs the trials themselves while the supervisor observes. And step 4 is feedback. The BCBA provides immediate, specific feedback, highlighting what the RBT executed flawlessly and pinpointing exactly what needs adjustment.
Is that a one-time intervention?
No, it is an iterative loop. The supervisor and the RBT cycle, through rehearsal and feedback, repeatedly until the RBT reaches a predetermined mastery criterion. For instance, the BCBA might require the RBT to execute the DTT protocol with 90% accuracy across 2 consecutive observations before they are considered independent on that specific program.
Wow.
We require our clients to demonstrate mastery before moving on. It is only logical that we require the same standard of our clinicians.
The pressure of all these rules, the timing, the phrasing, the data collection, the intervals, it can be overwhelming for someone just stepping onto the floor. To help our listeners anchor this sequence in their minds, I want to offer a memory hack. If you are sitting across from a learner, the materials are on the table, and you suddenly freeze, just recall the acronym ABCD.
Walk us through the components of ABCD.
It maps perfectly onto the trial structure. A stands for antecedent. That is your discriminative stimulus, your clear, unwavering instruction. B stands for behavior. That is a learner's response window where you observe what they do. C stands for consequence. That is your immediate delivery of reinforcement or your error correction procedure. And D stands for delay. That is the brief intertrial interval before you start the sequence over. Antecedent, behavior, consequence, delay. A, B, C, D.
I find that acronym incredibly practical, primarily because it forces the clinician to acknowledge the D.
The delay.
The delay is the component that novice technicians almost universally neglect. Human beings are deeply uncomfortable with silence. When an RBT is sitting across from a learner, a 2-second pause feels agonizingly long. Their instinct is to immediately fill the void with the next instruction. By explicitly remembering the D for delay, it gives them permission to breathe, reset the materials, and ensure the trials remain truly discrete rather than continuous.
It gives you a built-in moment to collect your thoughts before you throw the next pitch. As we bring this comprehensive analysis to a close, let's distill this deep dive into the absolute essentials. Give us a rapid review of the core principles every practitioner needs to carry with them.
Here are the 5 foundational takeaways to lock in. Number 1. Discrete-Trial Teaching is a highly structured, therapist-initiated mass teaching format designed to build skills systematically. Number 2. The entire framework rests on the 3-term contingency: the SD, the response, and the consequence anchored by that critical intertrial interval.
Right.
Number 3. Ignoring errors is not an option. Proper error correction mandates systematically representing the initial SD and utilizing a prompt to guarantee the correct response. Number 4. The efficacy of reinforcement is governed by timing. It must be delivered immediately within a 3-second window to properly reinforce the target behavior. And number 5. From an ethical standpoint, an RBT's mandate is precise implementation of the BCBA's design. Modifying the structure of a program falls strictly outside the technician's scope of practice.
This analysis transforms DTT from a daunting, robotic manual into a logical, highly effective tool for changing lives. You now possess the insight to look at a complex behavior plan, decode the mechanics of the trials, and understand exactly why your precision dictates the learner's success.
You understand the underlying physics of skill acquisition.
Exactly. I want to thank everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the Behavioral Intelligence Mara Sánchez curriculum. If you want to continue refining your clinical skills, access full-length practice exams, and utilize premium resources to thoroughly prepare for your board certification, visit amethysttherapyservices.com.
It provides the comprehensive architecture you need to succeed in the field.
I want to leave you with a final thought to analyze as you go about your week. Observe how teaching naturally occurs in your everyday life. The next time you are attempting to teach a friend the rules of a complex new board game, or perhaps trying to teach a family member how to use a new piece of technology, pay attention to your own behavior. Notice whether you naturally fall into a structured rhythm of providing clear instructions and immediate feedback, or notice how quickly the process devolves into chaos and frustration when you fail to isolate the variables. You might just realize that the principles of ABCD are the secret to teaching absolutely anything.